Let's go ahead and jump in today. So our plan today is to do a quick overview of Microsoft Copilot and talk about the options that you have with this generative tool that are secure and private, but still incredibly powerful to change the way you approach your workflows. So to introduce myself here, my name is Larissa Cunningham, and I'm an Evolve 365 learning strategist with Planet Technologies. And I've had the amazing opportunity to work with a number of different organizations as they have received access to Copilot and begun implementing it. So if there's anything that you have questions on, I have an amazing team here from my colleagues at Planet as well to help answer any questions that come up. But I'll also pause and save some time at the end as well for anything that you didn't have addressed during the rest of our session today. So I do just want to say, of course, I have taken a lot of time to try to understand Copilot and how it functions in the various environments that we are accessing. And it's approachable, but it does still take a learning curve. It follows natural language. We can use our normal speech patterns, but it's different than what we might be used to. So my goal today is to help inspire some different ways we can start to incorporate it. And my biggest recommendation that you'll hear me say is to just try and begin chatting with Copilot. So all of that being said, let's go ahead and talk. I asked myself, apologies. We're going to go ahead and talk about our agenda today. So we're going to do a quick overview of what Microsoft Copilot is, how we can access it, and then we'll take a look at the interface and navigational features. One call out I do want to make is that many of you might be in slightly different environments. We are going to be focusing on the commercial or enterprise experience as well as the GCC experience. And if you don't know which environment you're in, again, we'll talk about that in a moment, but my demonstrations will mainly be focused in the GCC environment. So if you have questions or see something that's a little different in your experience, please feel free to add those to the chat and we can clarify any context there. One of the key elements that we'll talk about today is going to be creating prompts. So this is the core of your engagement with Copilot, and we want to set you up for success and ensure you're including the best elements to get better results. So throughout all of this, we'll be sharing use cases, different tips and tricks to try, and ultimately just want this to be as valuable to you as possible. So don't shy away from asking those questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to start out today with talking about what Copilot is and how it's functioning. So AI is the buzzword lately, and there are a lot of different ways we all incorporate AI. But Copilot is a generative tool, and it is leveraging the capabilities of a lot of those other models that you might have heard of, but they're being incorporated directly into your Microsoft environment. So that's giving us a really easy pathway to begin making more use of our time. So whether that is summarizing lengthy documents or helping you get to the core of details that are listed in there, or whether you're crafting something brand new and professional, customer ready. All of these are going to have opportunity to create captivating presentations, different articles, elevated communications in general. I do want to emphasize that since we have a number of tools to choose from, it's very important that you not use any non-approved AI web services, because the natural state of many of these services can potentially expose personal or confidential data if they don't meet certain security requirements. So the good news is when you're using Copilot with your work account, you automatically have your data integrity and built-in enterprise data protection. So we'll talk quite a bit about the security today, but rest assured, this is a very secure way to engage some of these features that a lot of people are talking about. So one of the key characteristics with generative AI. It doesn't matter whether it's Copilot or another tool you're using. Because of the nature of how they work and how they're trained, there is a tendency for AI to sometimes create what are called hallucinations. And true story, I did laugh the first time I heard that. I thought it was a parallel to help me understand, but this is the actual term for when AI is producing convincing but incorrect responses. So it is being generated off of the patterns it's learned and what it can connect in the background, which means we're still going to be crucial when we engage with AI. You still are going to be the expert in your field, and you'll be responsible to validate and verify any of the responses or content you create. The other thing I want to highlight with AI is that it's rapidly changing. There are constantly improvements coming through, especially in the commercial environment. There are different changes or features rolling out all of the time. And GCC is closely mirroring that. So even if you're in a slightly different web environment there, you're going to see a lot of those changes come through pretty quickly. And today's AI is going to be the least advanced we'll ever use. So while it's changing and we need to adapt with it, I just want to note that Microsoft does listen to the feedback we're providing and is working on improving the user experience you'll see. So no matter what environment you're in, Copilot Chat is going to have data protection. So we are going to need to make sure we're signed in with our work account, and automatically our enterprise data protections will be enabled. And there are a couple key visuals I'll point out during our demonstration that let you know those are engaged. When that is engaged, you are not going to have any of your conversations seen by anyone outside of your organization or anyone else in general. There is a conversation history element. It's purely for you to be able to leverage the work you've already put in, and no one else is going to see that, and it's personally exclusive. So you're not training the Copilot AI models. It's never leaving the security of that conversation. So I do just want to talk a little more specifically about both enterprise or commercial cloud, as well as GCC, which is the government community cloud. So if your organization is a commercial business, this could be something like retail, healthcare, finance, anything like that, you're likely on an enterprise commercial cloud. Whereas if you're working for any US government agency, like a federal, state, or local government, or a contractor supporting those, you might be in a GCC environment. So you can always check with your IT team to get clarity here, but those are just some quick ways to try and understand which environment you might be in. So enterprise is designed for commercial organization, and it does meet global compliance standards like ISO and GDPR. And the data is encrypted both in transit and while it's resting. So you're very secure in that environment as well. But if you're working with a government agency, there are some additional requirements that we meet to ensure that data integrity as well. So these are going to be a slightly different secure environment in the Microsoft cloud, and these are US-based data centers, and it's going to follow through all of the requirements needed for that security, and only US personnel are going to have access to it. So these are just meeting different levels of security requirements depending on your organization. All of these are secure. So we'll be doing this live with you today, and I do encourage you to follow along if you can. So if you're navigating for the first time, I'm actually going to put the link here in the chat. This should take you to the home area for your Microsoft experience. This is where you're typically going to find your chat and a lot of your history and other capabilities. So again, we'll make sure we're signed into work. If you're signed into a personal account, you will be missing this green shield that we see over here. And it just means it's functioning differently with your data. All right, so before we get into our live demo, I want to emphasize how different Copilot Chat is from what many of us are likely used to. So if you're like me, you have had a lot of experiences where you would go to your favorite search engine and you would try to condense a really big thought into 4 or 5 words. Copilot gives you the option of actually adding that color to your picture and scenario and then customizing what comes back. So it's far beyond a search engine, although it does have some cool capabilities we can leverage in that regard. It really functions more like a conversation between you and a colleague where you want to paint a full picture of what you're trying to do and then have it give you some insight, explanations, brainstorm with you, and create new content as needed. So as promised, I mentioned we would talk about a couple of these benefits with Copilot specifically. There's a lot of tools to choose from, so why are we choosing Copilot? The first reason is that Copilot's leveraging the latest AI models that are available. And you'll actually see some options today where you can kind of adjust how deep Copilot's thinking, but if you need to do a more in-depth analysis, those capabilities are there and developed already with the security in place. The second reason is because you do have really easy source transparency. So very often when you're prompting with Copilot, it's going to automatically cite its data sources, whether that's an attachment that you included in the chat, or whether you're reaching out to find other web sources that you want to reference. I will say if it doesn't automatically give you these sources, you can always send a second prompt and say, please provide your sources, and it should provide links and you will want to verify those. Now, when we have access to that web search, it means that we also don't have a knowledge cutoff date. So rather than being limited to just what Copilot was trained on in its development stage, you're going to be able to access real-time, up-to-date information, and it's not going to be limited to that training data. And then last but not least, our favorite reason is our data protection, which is ensuring that our conversations are encrypted and they're secure, and your conversations are never being used to train any of these models. So all of that being said, here is a quick visual tour. We'll get here together today, but what we're going to be taking a look at are a number of functionalities. So of course, the main portion of our screen is an invitation to begin a conversation. Directly below that, you'll see things like suggestions and options for you to start a conversation. These are meant for inspiration if you don't know where to get started. Now, as you start to have conversations, you may find that you need to reference an existing chat that you've already had with Copilot. So that conversation history is going to be available on the left-hand side underneath a conversations element. And one of the benefits as well is going to be because you're having a conversation, it understands all of the context that's being built. So if it gives you not quite a perfect response the first try and you say, no, this is what I meant, let me add some context, it's going to be able to pull from your original prompt and your second prompt and what it gave you the first time to give you better and better responses. So that being said, if you're changing topics, I highly recommend starting a new chat and clearing that context so it doesn't unintentionally overlap things you didn't mean to. So once you get there, you're going to just enter your prompt. You can try some of the suggested prompts or your own. And then we always want to check our sources, validate the information we're seeing, and continue the conversation. There are a lot of opportunities where Copilot will give you ideas for how it can continue to help. But if you don't necessarily need those and you have a different idea of how it can engage with you, keep that conversation going and don't rebuild the wheel just because the next task is a little bit different. Let it use what you've already created. So all of that is great, but I'm going to go ahead and show you in real time so that you can follow along with me. I am starting here on the home page. I'm in an Edge browser, and the first thing we're going to do is check my account. So down at the very bottom on the left-hand side, you should see your name. And if you click open, you should see your work email in here. If you don't, this is your opportunity to sign out or switch accounts so that you can engage with this enterprise data protection. So I do notice right away I am signed in. I have that protection because up in the top right corner, I see a green shield with a check mark. If you want to learn more about that, there is a link here that will tell you a little bit more about how that works, but we're going to continue through what's available here. So right next to that is where your new chat icon is going to be. Sometimes it does look a little different. I will actually quickly open my commercial environment and notice how the new chat is still here, but it is a slightly different icon. So sometimes I find it helpful to just hover over some of these features to make sure I'm looking and assuming it does the thing I anticipate it will, but just know it might look a little different for you. And then right next to the chat is where we're going to see the option to decide how long it's thinking or if you're just looking for a quick response. I personally tend to keep it on auto because it will adjust how long or in depth it goes based off of the query and the prompt you give it. But if you know what you need, you can go ahead and switch that preemptively. Now, along the left-hand side, this is where our navigation is. I want to highlight there are a couple ways we can access Copilot, and every once in a while, that navigation is collapsed. So if you don't see that initially, look for this little square icon, and we're going to expand the navigation. Directly beneath my chat is where you'll find your history. Typically, it will pull together some recent conversations, and if you don't see what you're looking for, you can select all conversations, which will give you a chronological order of when you've chatted with Copilot and allow you to search so that you can jump back into a conversation that's already been built out. So we are going to start with just a couple additional things here. I'm going to share a prompt just for you to start getting an idea of how Copilot will respond to you. So I'll put that here in the chat. Feel free to tweak it or adjust it as you would like to. But we're just going to start with something simple here. And I want it to just brainstorm 10 professional team mascots for a public sector IT modernization program. And we're just going to try to get an idea of how Copilot's responding to us. Now, I do have the option of adding specific content here, but for now, we're just brainstorming. I'm going to send this off. So as it's generating, this is where it will take a little bit longer if you have an in-depth request, but typically it comes back pretty quick when you're just brainstorming and trying to come up with ideas. So while we're waiting for that to come back, I'll point out a couple additional things here. Down at the very bottom above our prompt text box, you might see an icon like this that has a little square and a star on it. This is your prompt gallery. We can get here before we start a conversation as well, but if you're looking for ideas and inspiration, this can be a great thing to open. It will give you a pop-up and you'll see a number of pre-created prompts that you can customize or save if they're going to be helpful for you. So you can filter these by the task itself. Maybe you're trying to learn something new, or maybe you've been out of the office and you need to catch up. You can filter based off of that and the job type. But ultimately, if you see one that's helpful, because there are typically very many that are options for you, I recommend looking for this little bookmark icon to save that prompt. What that does is actually adds it to this second tab here at the top of our prompt gallery, and any of the ones you've saved will be here. So this is the one I just saved. This was created by Microsoft. You can also save your prompts as well if you come up with something that you know you're going to be using again. Those will be indicated with your initials, and that is one that you've created. So I'll show that here in a moment. But let's go ahead and see what Copilot came up with. And initially it's coming down, it's responding to my actual conversation like a person would. And then it's giving me exactly what I asked for. So I said, please return as a 2-column table with the name and the mission. So it's looking for 10 options. It's saying, try these names: Bike Guardians, Patch Patrol. These are kind of fun. If you come up with different things, I'd love to see those in the chat and kind of what you're seeing as it comes through. So this is where that brainstorming comes in. I can see where this is, and if it doesn't quite meet what I'm looking for, now I have a clearer picture of what I need to adjust or clarify in my prompt. I also want to highlight that we can start to use these, and Copilot typically encourages you to continue the conversation. So here at the bottom, it's saying, hey, do you want me to add a short tagline, or do you want any visual concepts? You'll notice I also have some quick prompts right above my text box that produced as well. These are going to change based on your conversation and the topic you're discussing. So always take a look and see if it's helpful to start from one of these. So when you click on it, you don't have to do any typing if you don't need to, or you can add additional context or clarity to what has been pre-drafted. So we'll just send that one off here. And again, hopefully we'll get some quick taglines back to encourage us to keep going. So awesome. I am enjoying the feedback here. The secure squirrels, the integrity owls. I like it. These are great. So from that initial process, we might move on to our next example here if this doesn't quickly come through. I can be known to be impatient with Copilot, but I encourage you to remember how much work it's doing and how much information it's pulling. So we can continue that conversation. It will pull this through, but just in the interest of your time, we'll go ahead and take one other approach here. And I'll take this opportunity to even show you that if we start to see it's coming back with a result that doesn't meet what we needed, rather than waiting for it to fully generate, you do have a stop option down here. Sometimes it shows up in the conversation itself, but we can go ahead and click stop, and it's just gonna stop what it's doing. We can go ahead and adjust our prompt as needed. So we are going to do one more prompt before we move on. And so it is a different topic. I'm going to come up to the top and start a new chat. Now I'll put this here in the chat as well for you to follow along with, and feel free to try these. All right. Now, I appreciate those of you who understand which environment you're in. Most of the functionalities we're showing today should be available in both, but we can always clarify if you're seeing something that doesn't look quite right. So I put in the chat here, but I'm going to ask it to help me see something from multiple perspectives. So I want it to help me rewrite this request from multiple roles. And this is something we'll talk about again in a minute when we're deciding how to prompt and converse with Copilot, but I'm giving it perspectives to take on. And here's my request: help me get started with Copilot. So for each of these, I want a goal, a constraint, and how to judge if it's being successful. Now, before I send this off, I'll point out your prompt suggestions down here. You may see an option to see more. These will look different for you based off of your engagements, and your prompt gallery, if you want to initially start a conversation with a saved prompt, is down here at the very end. That will still pop up. So just so you know where to find those features, but let's go ahead and send this off. Now, I'll point out that you can tell it's thinking a little bit deeper, and I did have that option to get a quick answer. So if it starts to think deeper and it's taking longer than you want it to, and it's not necessary for your request, you could select that icon while it's generating, and it will adjust its approach and give you a quicker response. So in this moment, it gave me some feedback while it was reasoning, and then gave me some rewrites of the goal I had. So we have our executive sponsor here. This is what their request might sound like. And hopefully, if you're trying this along with me, you'll see this looks very different than if we were approaching this as a frontline employee. The goals that we have, the constraints that we have, and the success metrics are going to be vastly different depending on what your day-to-day looks like. So if we come down here to help desk as well, I'll just showcase that also looks very different, and the metrics would be different again. So from here, we can continue this conversation, but we'll jump into some prompting techniques. Hopefully this is getting you started though. So I want to talk about something we call context engineering, which is just a fancy way of saying treat your AI tools like they're a new team member. If you had a new member that recently onboarded, you wouldn't assume that they had the background understanding of the goals that you're trying to achieve or the processes that you currently have in place. Copilot's going to be the same way. So we want to make sure we're providing all of the right information, really clear instructions about our expectations, and giving it everything it needs to be successful. I wouldn't blame a new employee if I said a very, a five-word sentence of go summarize this, but I didn't tell them what it was for and that we're actually turning that into a presentation. So that's the same thing. We need to be understanding of what information we're actually sharing so it can be successful in its job. So what does make an effective prompt? Effective prompts are going to be really specific and detailed. Typically, they're in full sentences with clear instructions, and they're going to include things like the tone, the purpose, and the format that you're going for. So in this example here, we're looking for findings of the article that's been copied, and we want to include the top 3 concerns, provide these answers in 2 or 3 paragraphs, and use a business tone. That result is going to come back significantly different than if we just say, summarize this article or recap the findings of this article. So if you have a vague or just a few words that you're putting in the prompt, just understand that you're going to get a less tailored response back. So there's no wrong way to engage in these conversations. It's very helpful to see the difference. So feel free to test these out as you can and use your natural conversation as well. I do want to call out a couple of prompt elements that can be very beneficial to include. And you've seen a couple of these topics already come up. So the first is going to be consider approaching the prompt you're creating by telling AI what kind of persona it needs to take on. If it's approaching a report, it's going to respond very differently if it's an expert in that field or topic than if it was a new employee or a external person that wasn't as familiar with the technical information. The next element to include is a task. This, in my opinion, is the most important because if you don't tell it what you're expecting it to accomplish, you're probably not going to get exactly what you want. Are we summarizing something, or are we answering a question and learning more about a topic? Are we generating an email or a report? Those are all very different final results, so we need to be very clear about our expectation. Format is something that's very closely tied to the task, but it's not always explicitly stated. Summaries can look like a full paragraph, and they can also look like a 5-point bullet list or a number of things in between. So the format that you're looking for should be included with very specific callouts. I also encourage you to think about who will be using the information that you're generating with Copilot. Just like we approach the task differently depending on our expertise, we also receive information differently depending on the audience type we are. So if you're creating something for your executive leadership, it's going to have a different polish and professionalism to it than if you're producing a resource for your internal technical team that needs to know all of the minute details. And then lastly, I encourage you to add the tone you're wanting to incorporate initially. There are times when Copilot will ask if you want to adjust the tone or give you suggestions, but my goal is to save you as much time as possible. So if we can include that information on our first attempt, it only has to maybe generate once or twice if we're making minor changes. And that can then be something you run with and start to change and work with on your team. So of course we have that flexibility to add and clarify later, but incorporating it up front can be very helpful. So if you were to use all of these elements, your prompt could look something like this, where we fill in the blanks and make sure we're incorporating all of this context. So maybe we're thinking like a project manager and we're creating a summary of the project we just finished, and we need it to be formatted like a formal report. It's going to be read by executive leadership and so forth. So you can see how quickly this structure of a prompt can change drastically depending on the information we're adding into it. So this is a structure to consider, but you may still find you have additional elements you still want to add. So we'll try one here together in a moment, but this is a communications example. Maybe we are creating a communication for public release, and we're summarizing some of the key elements that we have recently been promoting. So that is going to use a clear language and public-facing tone that has a very broad reach and is easy to understand. So we're going to go ahead and try this together. I do want to give you a number of ideas here on the screen really quick to get you started, because there's no one right way to approach your engagements with Copilot. So if you're summarizing things because you have a lot going on and you need to find details, that's a great start. But if you need to draft new presentations or internal policies, that is another great way that Copilot can be leveraged to ensure you're following the right style of language and incorporating what is appropriate for your organization. So there are a number of different ways we can go about this. I will leave this here for just a moment, but now we're going to go over and actually test this process. All right, so I'm going to come back here again. I'm personally demonstrating from a GCC environment. If anyone has questions for the experience in commercial, I'm happy to address that. So we're going to start a new chat again since our topic changed, and we're going to give Copilot a little bit of information about what we're trying to do. So I am going to take on this from a project manager, and I want it to create a project summary document template. And it's going to be formatted like a business report for an executive team. So I'm giving it kind of all of this structure to begin with. If you have a relevant document you're wanting to incorporate, I'm doing a template in this instance, but you can actually reference your online documents, or you can upload from your device and make it even more tailored with that information in mind. All of those are going to be stored in your OneDrive and secure, so it still follows all of that same security. You can have that peace of mind. So I'm not going to do that in this instance, but we just want to see how it comes back and what changes we might want to make. So I'll go ahead and put this here in the chat as well. Feel free to change any elements of this, like the persona or how you want it formatted, so that you can compare and contrast with my result here on the screen. And since it's taking a moment to generate, I do just want to use this opportunity to ask if anyone has any initial questions that we can address so far.
Nothing's come up in chat, Larissa, but I'll keep watching it and see. And if anyone wants to come off mute, they can do that as well. Oh, here's there's a great question that just came in. Can you refer to another conversation within a separate conversation? So can you reference a Copilot chat and another Copilot chat?
That is a great question. I don't believe directly, but I am going to show you a couple of things that you can do to make your responses from Copilot a resource you can start to reference. So depending on how long this takes, I'll try to show you with this response as well. But while it's working, what will happen is when you get this response at the very end of what's generated, you'll see a number of options for what you can do. One of them is to copy that response. You can do a couple of different things, but one of those options is going to be to turn Copilot's response to you into a page. If you're not familiar with pages, it is going to be built off of a similar structure as Loop. And if you're not familiar with Loop, that's okay. I'll show you what it looks like. But essentially, it's creating a canvas where you can pull together information and also collaborate really easily with some of your colleagues. So you can share that page, allow other people access to it to modify and adjust. Now, I do apologize. This one's taking a little bit longer than I expected it to. So if we need to, we can jump to another conversation and I'll show you what that's like. And when you're working on this personally, sometimes it will take a little longer. So I will go do a separate task and come back to it. If it times out, I'll start over again. But in the interest of your time, I want to showcase how to do what we just. It heard me getting ready to give up. So in this instance, I specifically told it to give me a Word document. And so one of the reasons it took so long was it was developing that Word document in the background. So when you do things like that, it might actually develop a resource for you. And you can simply click the blue hyperlink and it should go to your downloads. You'll probably want to open that and save it to a cloud location, but this is giving me a quick summary of what just occurred. So we're going to go ahead and look at these options down here. So this is where you can copy the response exactly as it came through. Or right next to it, we see a little pencil icon with some lines behind it. And this is where you can edit directly in Pages. So this is going to hopefully reduce some of the additional steps you need to take when turning your conversations into resources. So it will give you a title based off of your initial prompt. You can do this. I'm not very creative right now, so we're just going to call this a demonstration. This will update my pages now titled demonstration, as you can see. And it pulled every element of that feedback. These pages are a resource that you can reference in your conversations, and you can continue the conversation you're having and start to add those elements in as well. So if we continue this conversation and ask it to do something else, we'll be able to see this little plus icon and continue to add new context and responses to this page. So this one's pretty simple here, but from here, I want to highlight how valuable this can be, because if you share this with your colleagues, you can start to use some of the different pre-formatted templates that are available in here. So you'll see a plus icon, and you can quickly insert a table, a checklist. And if we scroll all the way down, you can use things like a voting table, where when you share this, people can come in and you can assign ideas. They can use this without having to create these all on their own. So there's even things like being able to assign tasks, but they do need access to the page in order to see those assignments. So in the interest of time, I won't showcase everything you can do, but I'll highlight as well that if you ever get to a point where this collaborative environment needs to turn into a polished resource, you can save this or turn this into a Word document as well. It's going to pull this title that you had and create a Word document directly to your OneDrive. So there's a lot of options and ways we can incorporate this, but that is how I would recommend saving some of those more important conversations so that you can access them later. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to try one more scenario here that hopefully responds a little bit faster for us, but I'm going to take on a persona that I'm an IT director who's specializing in cybersecurity, and we're putting together a bring your own device policy. So I'm trying to paint the picture of what matters, how I want it to approach and prioritize things. So cybersecurity is going to be number one, and what we're eventually looking to do with the information Copilot gives us. So again, if you want to follow along with this on your own, you can use the prompt from the chat and make any changes you want to. So I'm going to send this off. We are going to add in a document here in just a moment. If it was beneficial at the very beginning, we could have added content here and incorporated it to our initial context. So it is thinking just a little bit deeper for me, but it did that pretty quickly, and it's pulling together a professional, comprehensive overview of how we should pull this together. Now, in the interest of making sure that I'm following all of the appropriate procedures, I'm noticing here it's not referencing any resources for me. Now, if it is pulling something from a website directly, it will pull a reference icon right after the portion that pulled from that, if that makes sense. That being said, in this case, it just generated new information for me. So what I'm going to do is come to the very bottom. We're going to have to wait for it to finish responding, but we're just going to directly ask for any resources it can give us for these compliance and standards. So we won't read through the entire response, but this is pretty in-depth, and it's actually giving me a user agreement as well that I could take. I could save this as plain text or use this in a variety of ways. So it tries to meet you where it's most beneficial. All right, so let's go to the very, very end. Again, we see our edit in pages. If we wanted to add this to what we have already created or a new page, you can choose the drop down and you'll see add to recent pages. So that's going to pull up your most recent pages, or you can search if you have a lot of them. This is the one we just worked on. And if I select it, it will take all of this feedback and put it into that as well at the very end of my last data point. So it pulled all of that in. This is now all one page, and I can bring multiple people in to collaborate. So as we go through, let's just go ahead and say, please provide up-to-date resources on cybersecurity. We'll just say that. So I'm looking to make sure that everything it provided me aligns with any resources it can give me well, and it's going to pull from the web because I do have access to that in my space, in my environment. And in this case, it should provide me a list of links and resources that I can utilize. So I do see the question in the chat about your conversation history and your pages. So your conversation history is going to follow your normal retention policy, and after a period of time, it will disappear. So if you need to actually turn those into longer term resources, I recommend turning them into a page. The page itself shouldn't expire. It will be treated like your other documents that you have saved in OneDrive, for example. So that won't have the same kind of expiration date, but your conversations will follow your organization retention policy. All right, looks like we ran into an error here, which is okay. Sometimes that does happen. I have occasionally had to try this again. We'll try it again now, but if it doesn't work, hopefully it's working on you. My next point of troubleshooting would actually be to start a new conversation and try again. So we'll see how this goes, but when you are working with this, or you have the time to let this process while you're doing another task, this can help you start from the beginning brainstorming and mapping out what needs to be included. And then you can take it to the next step and have it actually draft a policy. Maybe it's getting inserted into an existing policy document. You can incorporate those resources and it will become more and more tailored to the additional information you're giving it. Maybe after that point, we need to bring leadership in and get approval for all of these changes. So you can start to see how incorporating Copilot is a flexible approach no matter where you're at in your workflow. So let's look at this. We tried it again, it came through, and notice at the end of each of these statements, it's giving me a number. So that's my first resource. If I click on this, it will open that website and I can make sure it's a valid website for me to be utilizing. Same thing here, that's the same one. 2 would be a new resource, and we can continue to look through all of these with specifics and look at each of those resources to validate. It should also be listed at the very end of your prompt. So when it finishes generating, you'll notice that we see a couple of those resources listed. And if I select this dropdown, I'm going to be able to review everything that was referenced here and validate that they're appropriate for the project I'm working on. So hopefully that starts to give you an idea for what we can achieve and how differently we can start to pull this in. I do want to cover just a couple additional things to keep in mind and some tips and tricks for you to try while you're working in your own environment. So again, there's no right or wrong way to approach your conversations here, but one of the things I personally love to do is I like to give as much context as possible and then ask the tool I'm using to ask me questions that will improve its response. I've done this quite a bit in a variety of circumstances, and there are so many questions I get back that didn't even occur to me to add in or incorporate as I was prompting. So this is a great way to ensure that you're thinking a little bit outside of the box and allowing different perspectives to come into play. You can also ask it to give you multiple options. When I'm brainstorming, I love doing that and saying, hey, give me 2 options, give me 5 options, rewrite this in multiple ways so that I can pick and choose and maybe even piece together the final element that I want to have. Asking for the tool to show its work can kind of help you see how it figured it out, what rules it's following, or the assumptions it might be making. So this can be a good way to try to understand the responses that you're getting and maybe tweak the approach if needed. We can use it to create FAQs. I will say if you're not using actual questions you've received, then it will anticipate common questions that could come up. And it gives you a great starting point to help the users with that resource understand the data in a different way. Some additional things you can try, especially if you're just getting started, are to have it help you create a prompt. Maybe you're trying to do data analysis and you don't know exactly how to frame your prompt. Say, hey, I want to do data analysis to improve our financial forecasting for this amount of time. Give me some prompts to start with, and it will, in this case, I'd say give me 5 prompts to start with and incorporate both of those here. And then you can pick and choose which ones might be beneficial to start using and adjusting for yourself. So ask those clarifying questions and don't be afraid to turn really big tasks that you want to leverage Copilot for into smaller tasks. So I often think of an approach called prompt chaining, where I start out with the initial element in the brainstorming portion, and then I say, okay, great, I like that. Now let's turn that into an agenda. Let's turn that into an itinerary. And then from there, maybe I need to pull together a presentation to promote what we're doing. And you can just build off of what was initially a very large task and help Copilot with the little steps along the way. So there are a number of misconceptions with Copilot. At the end of the day, if we want to use this for our benefit, having a growth mindset is going to be key. It's moving fast, it's constantly changing, and we as a group want to focus on progress, not perfection. So if you're feeling any of these things, don't feel alone, but don't give up either. And we would also love to help in that journey if there is a space where we can support training and learning some of these different tools. So on that note, I do want to save some time here for you to ask any questions we didn't get a chance to address or cover. And feel free to use the raise your hand feature or the chat experience. I also just want to emphasize that we have helped a number of different organizations launch Copilot, whether that was the included experience or licensed experience. And we very much want to help with the consistently changing tools that are available. So if that's something that we can assist with, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll go ahead and put some contact information here in the chat as well. Otherwise, we'll look for any additional questions you might have. All right, so if the response starts and it isn't what I'm looking for, how do I stop it? That's a great question. Let's go ahead and do that here really quick again. And we're just going to start a new chat. If you start typing, you might actually see some history down here as well. So let's go ahead and just ask it to build an itinerary for an offsite event. So as it's generating, you should see this stop icon at the bottom. If you don't, you might see a prompt here in the middle that says stop generating. Both of those are going to stop the response and give you the option to regenerate if you want it to try again. So I tried that just a moment ago and it helped get the response a little faster, or if it's not giving what you want, we can just try again. All right. I see a couple other questions. It looks like it's a feature in Copilot Chat for commercial. Can you speak to the use of agents in Copilot Chat? Depending on your question is, yes, we absolutely can. Agents are something that are going to differ in each environment. There may be restrictions, but I'll open up my commercial experience here and we'll see some of our agents are listed here on the left-hand side. You might see something like a knowledge agent or an analyst agent. These are specifically designed with certain tasks in mind, and you can think of agents as a specialized colleague. So rather than our friend here, Copilot Chat, that can reach all of the context we might want them to, an agent is going to be specific to what you're able to, it's going to be specific to a certain kind of task is what I'll say. There are a lot of different kinds of agents and there may be potential restrictions in terms of what you might have access to right now. So it's hard to speak to in great specificity without knowing what you can see, and it can look different for everyone. But those agents can be referenced in your chats. So as one of the additional icons, you can actually mention an agent if you have access to them, and it will specialize this conversation for the tools and preferences that agent has been given. Oh, I see the question came back up. Can we reference something from a previous conversation, but we don't want to combine them into one conversation? Simply mention it in the chat. So my recommendation was to actually create a page. And if you've done this before, you'll see this library section up here at the top. This will be where your previous pages are saved to and where you can get them. So what we did previously was once we got our response back, one of the options at the end, let's go ahead and pull together. Let's do this here. Oh, it would help if I used the example we were in earlier. So let's go ahead and look at our library. And this is where your pages are going to be. What we did was, I'll come back to this conversation, just jump into some existing context. At the very end of your final response, instead of referencing a conversation, what we're going to do is turn this into a page. So you're going to look for that pencil icon with some lines behind it. that will take the full response from Copilot and turn that into a page itself. And then one of the things we can potentially reference is that page, or if you turn that page into a document, those are then resources we can pull from. So not exactly like the functionality you were talking about, but that's what I would recommend for pulling from those or continuing the conversation itself. Awesome. Yes, you should be able to reference the page title, although, let me double check that because I work in a lot of different experiences. So I want to make sure that's something you can actually pull through. Let's go ahead and do, okay. I will say if you're using the non-licensed experience, you may not be able to reference it directly. However, those pages can be turned into Word documents that can be referenced. So again, I'm going to come back here. Apologies for that. If we look at this page, once we've collected all of the information we want, you do have the option of transferring that into a Word document. This will save to your OneDrive, and then that becomes something that you can attach as a document to the conversation that you're in. So I wish we had a little more time so that I could show you, but hopefully that gives you some options. And again, there's always changes coming. So that functionality might be down the road. We don't know. All right. Any other questions that we haven't had a chance to answer or that you would like to share with us at this point? All right. Well, again, I know your time is very valuable, so we appreciate you spending it here with us. If there's anything that we can do to help you individually or moving forward, please feel free to reach out and let us know. We appreciate all of your feedback and look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon.